Welcome to the Ben and Lauren Show. I'm Ben, this is Lauren, and here we are again. It is what time is it? See my watch.
Half past late.
It's late. But it's Saturday night, and we missed last Saturday night. We don't want to miss anymore.
We kept trying to get to the next nights, and I usually fall asleep. If it's not Saturday and I haven't had a chance to sleep in right now, I'm falling asleep at.
But you got a nap today.
I did. That's why I'm still up. But normally I'm falling asleep around 9 o'clock.
I had coffee.
And if I'm not asleep, I just feel so rotten and I'm so cold by 9:30 or 10. It's like I don't think I'll talk coherently about anything.
So what fascinating things we did this week. We did something fascinating even today. We A good friend of ours brought a Tesla coil in to demonstrate the amazing ability of electricity, the mysterious force that nobody really completely understands. His point was that we think of electricity as being understood and harnessed,
Common, very
common,
common use.
but it's only been what, 150 years? Less than that even.
Even less.
100 years? It's a new technology,
It is.
electricity.
And so many things have been born from it that we sort of forget that electricity itself is relatively new,
Yeah. So
or at
it
least
was
the use of it.
Right. So it was a Tesla coil, an actual 100% genuine Tesla coil. You plug it in, and it just instantly starts shooting not lasers, lightning bolts out from the top of it.
Bright purple lightning strikes.
And it was spectacular.
It was pretty amazing.
They put a fluorescent tube nearby, and it would glow.
Every
Just
time it pulsed, the light would light up.
Yeah, just in the air. So I thought that was fascinating. And there's a lot more to that. Well, we call it a technology, but there's a lot more to that force of nature than I think we fully understand.
And actually, it was eye-opening to me to consider that there is so much of it we don't understand. There is so much about the world around us we think we know about that we really don't.
Yeah. I mean, when I grew up and you go through school, you leave school basically saying, what's left? We've figured it all out.
Well, remember that in the 1800s there was thought that we should close the patent office because everything that was going to be discovered had been discovered.
No. We got a long ways to go.
Anyway, it was interesting because our girls were quite interested. Uh, they hovered between being really interested and thinking that it was going to blow something up. And Daniel, they're going, oh no, oh no, oh no, and Daniel's pointing at it, going, ooh, ooh, which is basically how life with Daniel and the girls has been.
Yeah, they're different personalities.
Well, if you get out a power drill, um, the three girls will all run away covering their ears, and Daniel will stand on top of you and try to take it away from you so he can use it.
Yeah. Daniel has a fascination with mommy and daddy's things.
Oh, yeah, and then there's that.
Yeah. He'll find my wallet. What's this? A credit card? Oh, what's this? Money?
He
Oh,
ignores toys that you're supposed to play with.
he loves my cell phone. He likes taking it off the charger and walking around the house till he gets bored and dropping it somewhere and then moving on to something
He
else.
wants to wear your glasses, carry your wallet,
My
carry your
glasses, yeah.
keys, talk on your phone.
Yep. Oh, phone. He loves phones.
He wants to just be daddy.
My favorite is my wireless mouse. He goes into my office, and what do? You sit down and you put your hand on the wireless mouse. But except he picks it up and says, "Oh, I think I'm going to go somewhere now." And he walks around and deposits my mouse somewhere in the house.
He likes to create treasure hunts with stuff in your office. He takes things and he puts them in bizarre places. You'll find I'll be sorting laundry in the basement and I'll find a bunch of Ben's coins that are all in special
Oh yeah,
plastic
my
boxes.
coins.
He took the whole stack and he hid them all around the
Yeah, he
house.
loves hiding them.
Anyway, we went
So,
from Tesla coil to Daniel
well,
peculiarities.
that moment when you sit down at your desk and you put your hand in the familiar location of the mouse and it's gone.
It's gone.
It's like, oh man, where is it? Daniel,
And of course, if you ask him, where's the mouse, he'll say,
eh.
oh.
And I say, oh, eh.
He doesn't really say very much. He's not very conversant.
So what else interesting did we do this week?
Besides hunt for things Daniel
Besides
hid.
hunt for.
Yeah, he put my earbuds down the furnace register the other morning.
Oh, I'm glad we didn't lose those. These.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's another one of her, things that she uses. So that's something Daniel's got to hide around the house somewhere.
Have available. What else do we do? Well, we stayed home. I realized that we put the kids' shoes and socks on to go to Bible study today, and they like being barefoot in the house. and I realized that they haven't had their shoes and socks on since we went grocery shopping 2 weeks ago. Um,
I took Daniel with me grocery shopping one time, so I put shoes and
okay,
socks
so
on
he's
for
been
him.
out of the house once since then, but we've just it's cold and wet, and mom and dad next door are in Florida till next week, and my parents keep having run-ins with illness. Although this week, thankfully, they weren't sick, but they thought they might pick up a cold. Anyway, so we just haven't gone
We've
anywhere.
been
So
home.
we stay home and we talk to each other a lot. And I have not felt well. I do not remember the first trimesters for the other three being four, four, 5. Is this my sixth first trimester?
Something like that.
Anyway, I don't
Yeah, this would
remember
be number
one
6.
being quite this rough. I don't actually get sick, but I feel terrible.
Because we have 4 surviving children,
Okay,
and our
so
5th is on the way.
and we lost the first, so okay.
This is
Yeah,
number
number,
6.
and I got all the way through the first trimester before I lost the first baby, which it's terrible enough to lose, the baby, but to have made it all the way through the first trimester.
You can't see in the video, but she's already got a little baby bump going.
Apparently, when you get to 5 or 6 babies, you have a bump right away. It's like, yep, 5 minutes pregnant. Oh, there's the baby bump.
I think it's exciting. It's confirmation.
Means I gotta go switch all my clothes out again.
Yeah, you said you don't have any pants.
Yeah, I've worn out all the maternity clothes. It's time for new ones. Well, I did find out Poshmark online has a lot of maternity clothes, so
Good.
if I can figure out what size I wear. Anyway, so we stayed home and we talked a lot, and I fell asleep by 9:30
Hmm.
most nights.
Yep, I've sent you to bed early a couple nights.
2 nights, I
2
think.
nights I've sent you off to bed early,
Hmm.
and I take care of all the dishes and get the girls to bed and everything else.
You spent a long time talking with Papa Pepper this week.
Oh yeah, that
You
was
got
very
to
fun.
have a long phone conversation with him.
Yep. We made another visit to Taycom, and after the meeting was over, I got in the car and I thought, you know what, I got some time. So I called him up, and I was not intending such a long conversation, but I don't know, we got going.
It sounded like you had a very interesting conversation.
And then I come home and debrief with my wife. Well, it's bizarre. It's one of the few times I'm away from my wife for like an extended period of time. So it was pretty much all morning. I didn't get back till the afternoon.
My mom always told me when I was growing up that she prayed that I would marry someone that I would talk with or that who would talk with me.
We talk all the time.
I think God listened.
Yeah, well,
That was a good prayer. I'm really thankful that God answered
well, I
that
knew
one.
we talk a lot because I kept telling Papa Pepper, yeah, I was talking to Lauren about this, and I was talking to Lauren about that, and I was talking to Lauren about this. It's like, but that's who I talk to a lot.
I've heard a lot of mothers who have a bunch of young children make this complaint. They'll say, "Oh, I need to go out with my girlfriend so that I have an adult to talk to." And I was kind of always puzzled by that, and I'm still sort of puzzled by that, but I think I know what they mean. However, I don't have that feeling at all because you and I talk all the time.
We do.
So there's a really important thing about moms and dads being together, especially if you're going to have a large family,
Hmm. Talking.
and being able to speak together.
Well, I'm starting to talk with our girls more, but I give these deep philosophical conversations with my girls, and they just kind of glaze over a little bit.
Dad, did you know you have hair in your nose?
I noticed something cool. Check this out.
You
I don't know if you can see, I got white hairs
He
growing.
comes to me after dinner today and he goes, Lauren, are these white hairs in my beard? And I said, well, yes, Ben, you're 41. It's bound to happen eventually. He goes, cool.
I'm laughing because she was cracking up. I was being sincere. I was like, cool. I got I got gray beard hairs, wisdom.
This is one of those differences between men and women. Most women are like ready to sob into their tea.
Well, I notice you can't really see it in the
Of
video,
course, we don't
so
have beards. Maybe if we had beards that turned white, we'd be more excited about it.
it won't be impressive until you can actually see it in the video. I
Okay, you have one here and one here and one here.
Okay, what, 4 or 5? I
No,
thought.
you've got a good dozen.
All right.
They've been there a while.
All
You've got a
right.
whole bunch here. Anyway,
Maybe if I shave it off and let it grow back, it'll all come in white.
so as you can see, it's been a quiet week. Um, we did watch some of there was a hearing last week about making vaccines mandatory.
Oh yeah.
We spent a while watching that. And no matter what side of the vaccine debate you come down on, whether you think it's a good idea or not a good idea, the idea that a government might come along, our government, come along and mandate that you essentially make a medical decision, you are no longer allowed a medical decision about a drug to put in your body is a pretty shocking thing.
Well, the overreach, the fact that they're discussing possibly mandating,
And
requiring,
you're no longer allowed to find out which ones would be appropriate for you or your child.
it'd
It's
be a
just
medical decision.
and the problem with the government is they've proved to be terrible at overseeing things like this. I mean, you don't want the government in charge of your medical decisions.
So this whole discussion was kind of supposed to be low key. No one's supposed to be paying attention to it.
You mean the one in Congress?
The one in Congress, but word got out.
Well, it got out after Facebook and Pinterest, and Pinterest actually
And
deleted everybody's boards who had any anti-vaccine
it went viral.
information on it.
So I found out about the censorship before I found out about the discussion. All of a sudden, all this information on Facebook and Pinterest and other places that were not pro-vaccine, that were actually talking about some of the studies and things.
Anybody who talked about anything that could be considered anti-vaccine, which could be as simple as publishing the inserts from the vaccine so people could read them, that was considered
Yeah,
banned
they
material.
started eliminating it from the internet, and then after that, I found out, oh, they're having a discussion right now
Right.
about possibly mandating this, requiring this for children. And once you require it for children, it's just a small step away before it's required for
I'm not
everyone.
sure. I think they were discussing mandating it for adults
Was it?
also. Yeah, and it started because there's been some measles cases reported, and the CDC has been very proud about the fact that measles has been eradicated. And the way that they determine that is actually not by there being a cessation of all measles cases. It's just that once upon a time, here and everywhere else, measles cases were ongoing. There was always some measles cases. Now they occur kind of in pockets or in outbreaks. The vaccine does appear to have some effect, as in it drops the usual outbreak. It used to be, all children were getting measles pretty much all the time. Somebody had them, and now it does definitely has changed the way that measles breaks out. But there's been some outbreaks um, where they're,
And it's
very
headline
and
news.
it's headline news.
Everyone's talking about these measles outbreaks. But they asked one important question this time that they usually don't ask. What percentage of the people with the outbreak had been vaccinated?
There was one area in New York where there was an Orthodox Jewish community that had an outbreak, and they don't vaccinate because there are non-kosher ingredients in vaccines.
Very non-kosher
Well,
ingredients.
there's human cells, and there's actually a lot of
Animal cells.
well, not just animal cells, but there's parts from animals, that unclean animals, that are used to make them, and there's also gelatin. Most vaccines have gelatin in them, and it's
Not
not
something you
kosher
want to
gelatin.
squirt into your bloodstream.
Well, if you're Orthodox Jewish, you actually have a religious mandate against them. So there was an outbreak of measles among the Orthodox community. Now, from what I can tell, first of all, there was no fatalities, and there was not even really any secondary infection type problems, which is typical for measles. It's usually only a small percentage of people who suffer, any kind of a hospitalization worthy side effect from them, which doesn't mean they're fun to get. Just that the last time there was a measles death in the United States was 2015. So, anyway, apparently this was what triggered the mandatory vaccine
Well, what was the
response.
vaccination rate of the people who were experiencing the outbreak?
Well, in the Orthodox Jewish community, pretty low. Those were mostly unvaccinated people. But I think typically in a measles outbreak, at least 75% of the people who get it are usually vaccinated. It's a failure of the vaccine. It's unable to, and your
So,
immunity to measles vaccine
so they're
drops after a while.
pointing to this Orthodox Jewish community and blaming them and saying, because you are not vaccinated, you're causing this outbreak. Is that what they're saying?
Right, except it's occurring in places across the country that also have nothing to do with
You
that.
would think, though, it would be contained within that unvaccinated community and it would never spread outside of that contained area because
Right.
everyone else around them would be good little citizens and have the the injections.
Well, the interesting thing about the MMR vaccine, the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine, is that there's a large participation of people with it. I mean, it's one of the most common vaccines to get. So there's a large percentage of people in the United States who have it.
Hmm.
Um, Enough so that really what's called herd immunity should have been achieved through it. Well, they keep
So the
raising the percentage of how much we need to have herd immunity before it will eradicate it. I think they're now saying we need a 94% participation rate.
and that's what they want is a 94%
Well, they really
participation.
want 100%.
They want 100%.
Right.
They want to make it so that you can't really live without being vaccinated.
Right. So
Well, what
we
I
watched the
noticed,
hearings.
so what I noticed is that as soon as word got out, people took action, and they got in their cars and they showed up at the door,
Right.
and
They
they
actually
were
came to listen in
they were
person.
in the halls. Now they were promised a seat in the hearing, but they never got it. But they stayed out in the halls, and they were outside the building. They were not expecting the thousands of people. I don't know how many people actually showed up, but
It looked pretty crowded.
it was a very large crowd. It was enough that if you were there, it would be a little bit intimidating if you were in on that hearing.
What's actually interesting about the people who showed up, a lot of people who will protest mandatory vaccines are actually not against vaccines. They're just against having to give up all autonomy in choosing when to get them, which ones to get, how many to get. Some people want their children on a delayed schedule. They don't
Mhm.
want to get all of them all at the same time. Some kids have developed allergies to ingredients in them, so they want to leave that one out. I know a lot of people for the DTaP vaccine. There's a bunch of children who will request only getting the DT, so they'll get diphtheria and tetanus, but not pertussis. So there's a lot of things like that with where if you make it mandatory, those kind of freedoms would go away. And that's kind of important to people to be able to make decisions about what they do medically, what drugs they take is really very important to a lot
And
of people.
exemptions are extremely important. Either the religious exemptions or medical exemptions, some kind of exemption, uh, because you can't have a mandated medical procedure with exemptions. Otherwise,
No.
it's not really a mandate. Because anyone can come up with an excuse as to why they shouldn't get it. They want 100% vaccination because philosophically they believe that that's the only way it's really going to work effectively. But we've found that there are some issues with that because you are actually introducing the virus to the individuals who are being vaccinated.
Well, there's issues with any medical procedure, and that's why medical procedures are typically not mandated. You are given the choice. Should you have this surgery? Should you not have this surgery? The doctor can highly recommend it, say
Hmm.
you will die without it, but it's a very unusual situation for the federal government to be saying you must have this, and if you don't, there will be serious consequences.
And it's funny because we also have the right to try, right?
Well, now we do.
We do now, but that was even the right to try was kind of
That
pulling me
was
around.
well, I'm pulling you closer because you've got the microphone.
Okay. Well, yeah, the whole right to try idea is that if there's no conventional cure for your illness, you have the right to try unconventional cures,
Or
right?
experimental ones that haven't really been licensed for use yet, but they're doing human trials and
Hmm.
you're allowed to try. It's interesting that the same people who wanted to mandate vaccines wanted to say that people should not have the right to try.
Right.
That's just a strange dichotomy too.
Yeah.
So we watched these hearings, and it was interesting that a lot of controversy was sparked by the FDA chief, who was Scott Gottlieb, who said if the states didn't step up in making vaccines mandatory, then the federal government, the FDA especially, really ought to get involved and do it on a federal level, mandate it. And it was interesting that right after these hearings, and there was this huge outcry and huge, participation rate, and people, the public, actually got involved. And at least one physicians group got involved too and said this should not, this should remain between parents and families and its states, and it should not be a federal government issue. Interesting that Scott Gottlieb, who was showing no signs of resignation, suddenly resigned this
Yep.
week.
He said he was in for the long haul,
And he
and then
literally,
he just suddenly said, "I need to spend more time with my family."
yeah, he literally used the "I need to spend more time with my family"
I can
line.
understand I'd like to spend more time with my family line. I really can. But people who
That's
have
code.
I if you have an ideology and a philosophy in the workplace and you have stated goals, you don't just suddenly say, never mind, I'm gonna
And apparently,
retire.
from what videos we've watched of him, he had pretty serious goals. He had some
He was against the e-cigarette. He wanted to eliminate e-cigarettes from convenience stores and gas stations, and
right. Well, the reason that he was hired, the reason that he was picked to be FDA chief was to work on making more generic medicines available. And apparently, he had ties to a lot of the pharmaceutical companies, and was felt that he had a good bargaining position to help bring down drug costs.
I think he was successful on that, wasn't
Yes, I believe that he has been successful in that. But his other two projects, where he wanted to eliminate e-cigarettes from being sold, and he wanted to work on, he said that it was unacceptable that vaccines are so available and people don't take them. He felt that that's kind of a travesty, and it needs to be fixed.
he? And he was talking about misinformation that's spreading online,
Hmm.
and it's
Making us too fearful.
and isn't it interesting that all the supposed misinformation suddenly vanishing, or at least being attempted to make vanish, right about the same time they're talking about mandatory vaccination.
It was a very interesting week to watch. Um, I'm relieved they didn't make it mandatory. Mandatory things make me a little nervous because when you don't have an option to opt out, you know,
Not having an exemption option,
if for any reason you decided that it wasn't a good idea, not being able to say no is a really kind of a frightening feeling. It's like you're trapped in a little corner, and you have to do what authorities say you do, or the consequences are severe. And there's a lot of things we have like that in our life, and it's just not pleasant to think about adding another one.
taxes.
Well, yeah, we have property taxes. Well, buying car insurance. Although you could just
In
not own a
Michigan,
car.
in Michigan,
If you didn't want to buy car insurance, you could avoid owning a car.
but then you got to take the bus,
Either way, I mean, you do
ride a
have an
bike.
out. And when they were talking about making health care mandatory, we don't we carry a bill share program instead of health insurance. And health insurance would be cripplingly expensive for us. Um,
Yeah,
at this point, it would be
especially with a growing family.
about a third of our monthly income.
People do that.
Yeah.
People do. I mean, a third goes to the mortgage, a third goes to the health insurance
Well, thankfully, that the mandate on that has been rescinded. Um,
for health insurance.
well, so now we don't have to. By joining a bill share, we actually weren't paying a tax penalty either.
Hmm.
There was a provision in the law that if you were part of some type of a program that had
That
already
tax
been
penalty's gone
established.
now, though, isn't it?
Yeah, it's
It's
gone
gone
completely. The
completely.
mandate's gone. But that is how we avoided paying any penalty the years that it was a
And it
mandate.
worked.
It was 2 years, I think, that we would have paid a penalty.
Yep.
So it's looking to me like they're not going to be able. The outcry is too great to make the vaccines mandatory, and I'm glad, because let's not add one more
Hey,
mandatory
I'm
thing.
just relieved that a crowd of people coming in actually made a difference. But what if that information, that meeting was happening, never really got out? I mean, what happened?
The outcry would have been pretty great if it tried to get really put through. It was just a hearing. It wasn't like it was a vote or a bill or.
So it only got as far as a hearing.
Well, I'm sure they're gonna. It's a Democratic House. I'm pretty sure they're gonna. I mean, they passed a bill this week saying that illegal aliens could vote.
Oh yeah,
I mean, this is a nutty nutty group of people in there.
and it's just gonna get nuttier. So that's one thing we've been talking about.
Yeah, we talked about
That
that a while.
that topic came up. What are some of the other things? We discussed the Torah portion this week, today.
The Torah portion was kind of a quiet one this week.
Moses was setting up the tabernacle, and then the Shekinah glory came down. That's a big deal.
It's a big deal, but it's not much of a Torah portion.
Hmm.
I mean, there's not a.
One of the things we talked about is the shape of the. How should I get the picture that Abigail and Susanna drew?
Can you do that without messing up the microphone? Last time we did that, it really destroyed the video we were doing.
Oh yeah, we have to have our props ready to go, or else everything gets messed up.
Maybe we can talk about that another time.
Okay.
I
If
don't
I
even
if I
I don't even
leave,
know where the picture is.
yeah, as soon as I leave, it messes up everything up,
We
the
had a
technical stuff.
discussion about the shape of the Ark of the Covenant, and while we were discussing, our girls drew a picture,
Yeah, it was pretty neat.
which was interesting. Well, when we go to Bible study, the temptation is to bring a lot of entertainment for our kids to do, because it's a lot of work to keep them quiet and doing what they should and sitting in their chairs. And so we've cut down what we can bring for them to do to pretty much just coloring.
So if they sit there and color, then their ears are
They're,
are open.
we're hoping that by doing that, it is giving their hands something to do, and it is a long time to ask little kids to sit.
It's about what, 3 hours?
About that.
Because we get there at 1 and
Hmm.
usually leave around 4. So it's
So, but we've noticed that if they're coloring, they have something to do, but they're still listening, and I
hmm
think they're listening more.
yep. Well, obviously we started talking about the Ark of the Covenant and they drew it.
They drew it, yeah. That's interesting. We have to be careful with that though, because I think they could get a big head by thinking
Oh,
that we really approved so much of their drawing.
well, they better not watch this video then. They like watching the Ben and Lauren show. They're one of our fans. What can we say?
They're our kids.
They're our children. So, Abigail, Susanna, Elena, you are good at drawing, but don't let it go to your head. And we're not boasting.
Well, we did have a philosophical discussion this week. Um, I don't know if it really relates to the Torah portion, but we were talking about how our kids have not actually watched any Disney movies.
hmm
And we started off not showing them Disney movies because we don't really watch all that many to start with, and we noticed that there were some things in them that tend to be troublesome to older people when you get the idea into your head. And one of the things is the whole concept of follow your heart,
Right.
which, you know, your heart has its good points, but
Well,
apparently it's also considered deceptively evil in all its ways.
well, think about
It
Jiminy
is.
Cricket, the whole follow your heart, let your conscience be your guide type of thing. And it sounds good. Your conscience is what is spurred when you do something wrong. You're like, oh man, I know that was wrong. I got to make it right. That's your conscience. There's a problem though with the conscience. The conscience can be broken.
It can get corrupted.
It can be corrupted, it can be misguided. The conscience is not by itself a mechanism that's reliable.
Because people don't actually do things that are against their consciences for the most part. It bothers them too much. So either you have to deaden your conscience or you have to corrupt it to the point where it's actually not telling you the truth. And I think a lot of times people convince themselves that what is bad is actually good,
hmm
or they find some justification so that their conscience rests easy.
Or something that they're doing they feel guilty about when it's not shouldn't be a big deal. It should not be a big stress on themselves.
Right.
You know, having a carbon footprint, you should not lose sleep over that.
And there are people who, well, that was one of the things that showed up this week. There's women in Britain made this video talking about how human beings have killed 60% of the life on Earth since I've been alive. She's born in the late 1970s. So,
60%.
you know, the only thing that I can do is not have children, not add to this problem. And my children would only have maybe 10% of life left on Earth. And what kind of life would that? Anyway, there's a movement to not have children because we are so destructive to our environment. If you believe in evolution, don't you believe we evolved as part of the environment? Wouldn't this be like natural selection
You would
taking
think.
place? We're the fittest and we're surviving.
Yeah. Well,
Anyway,
don't they realize that they need to have children to indoctrinate them to keep the doctrine alive?
well, I don't know. Anyway, that's how your conscience can be conscience stricken over something that you shouldn't be conscience stricken over. It may not be even truthful.
So the philosophy of follow your heart uh, can be deceptive because the
Yeah.
conscience is not always a reliable.
And the Disney movies very, very much want to push that worldview. And I'm sure our kids will see Disney movies at some point. We just haven't made a big point of watching
But
them.
there is another philosophy that they push quite a bit, and that's what we were talking about.
Right. Well, I noticed that our kids are very good at imaginary lots of things. I mean, I'll watch Susanna playing, and she'll be sitting on the couch with a ribbon, playing with it, telling herself an entire story about this ribbon.
Right.
Her imagination is very vivid, and she's not unusual. All our kids are like that. Most kids that I know, their imaginations are vivid. So, why is it such a push to get kids to imagine? It's like on every TV show, every movie,
Imagine
it's like held up as kind of like
a virtue.
it's a virtue. You must use your imagination. It's like, why are we encouraging kids to use their imagination again? Why do they need encouragement? That's like encouraging them to like M&Ms.
Well, our theory is that you have to teach children how to imagine. This is from this doctrinal point of view. So you have to teach children to imagine so that when you start presenting information to them that might not initially make sense, they can use their imagination and it will make sense.
Right.
There are concepts that are taught that on the surface really seem odd.
Well, Santa Claus. We
Yeah,
talked about Santa Claus.
right. Or a number of different things that you can think of all sorts of your own imagine your own scenarios. And by the way, imagination is not bad. I
You
mean,
need your
God
imagination.
gave us the ability to imagine for a good purpose.
I think it's one of the things that keeps you out of trouble when you're going to do something. You sort of mentally picture the outcome of the action you're about to take, and your imagination sometimes lets you know quite vividly, oh, if I pick up this thing, that one's going to fall on my head and it's going to hurt.
But it's not really a virtue. I mean, it's not really an attribute that you have to practice and live by. You
It
don't
comes, yeah,
you don't live by imagination. You live by reality, and you have to train your imagination to be useful. Otherwise, it's
yes, you
just going to
do.
be full of, unicorns and rainbows.
And what's amazing is the concept of trying to teach children to imagine when that's pretty much all they do
Yeah.
is imagine. And
What you really should do is train your imagination to imagine the outcome of events.
right.
So you can have a vision or an idea of the future.
And I think mature people do that naturally. You train, at some point, you begin to harness your imagination to use it properly. But what we're noticing an outbreak among people who should be adults, like in their 20s and 30s, who imagine all kinds of really strange things and seem to have this firm faith and firm belief that because they imagined it, it is so.
It's true. It starts breaking down the barrier between what you're imagining and what is actually so, what is actually real.
And people are encouraged to use their imagination to envision things that aren't true.
And it sounds funny to most people, but some people take their fiction so seriously that in their minds it's real.
It is.
They'll say Star Wars is real. They'll say in a galaxy a long time ago, galaxy far, far away, they'll say that's all real. Like, no, it's not. That's a movie. It's like, no, that's real. Lightsabers are real. Jedi are real. Yoda's real. Spaceships are real.
I remember reading school teachers talking about how they actually had children coming through their class named Jedi.
Yeah.
Like, what?
Well, it's happening with Harry Potter. Children are
Right.
convinced that magic is real. That they can have their little magic wand and do their tricks, and it would actually work.
And it seems like it's a trivial thing. That what does it really hurt if children pretend like unicorns are real or Star Wars is real or any of these things that are not true are real? But what we're noticing is that there is an increasing lack of care or even recognition for something being true. You hear this phrase now, my truth.
My truth.
And it's as if you've experienced this. So even though nobody else can see what truth you're talking about, it's your truth and therefore it is true.
As if in your reality, Star Wars is real.
And it's come down to the point where, I mean, people, there's the obvious thing where someone's born a girl or born a boy and they believe that they are not what they were born. But it's even going beyond that. It's going to where people are imagining that they're a dragon.
And they actually take steps
And
to
they
become a
and
dragon.
they insist that people address them as if they're no longer human and they call them some other name. And so people are losing themselves deeper and deeper and deeper into fantasy worlds that they create for themselves. And the outcome is becoming stranger, and truth is valued less and less and less. It's become my
Yeah.
truth, your truth, whoever's
Well,
truth.
because from their perspective, truth is boring. When you have this whole fantasy world,
You're getting tied down to reality, and that's boring.
right, reality is boring. So they create a fantasy world, and the line between reality and fantasy starts to get blurred. And if we overteach imagination to young children, then eventually that lays down the foundation for that when they get older.
Because because the children already have their imagination is quite developed for
They
most
have
children.
more than sufficient imagination coming into this whole
So
thing.
encouraging it is like if you have bread dough that's already rising and you throw in about two or three more packets of yeast, you're going to have this bread dough that just goes bonkers and you can't make anything reasonable out of it.
So,
It just rises right out of all the bowl and everything you put in it. You fed it too much.
so it's the responsibility of parents to train their children to use their imagination responsibly.
To train their imagination to use it in a reality setting.
Right.
So, in other words, you can actually use your imagination to assist you in making wise decisions. You can imagine the outcome of this decision or that decision. It's what we did when we remember when we got married and we decided we wouldn't be alone together.
We imagined
We imagined two different kinds
two scenarios.
of wedding days. We imagined the day that we were getting married, very happy that we had done things the way we expected that God wanted us to, that we had, well, clean conscience, or another kind of day in which we had regrets that we had not behaved in ways that we would want our children to know about or anybody to know about, or that we had not upheld what we thought to be right. We imagined those two different ways.
And it made it very easy to make the right choice.
Well, I remember us discussing it.
Yeah.
I said, let's picture what it would be like.
Yep. But that's a good use of imagination.
And it made it easy to not do what we should not do. It made it very easy.
Now, sometimes when we're scared, it can kind of taint our vision of what's going to happen or what is down the road, because we always have a tendency to kind of have a little bit of built-in bias in our imagination. But the point is, it's important to harness that imagination for something related to reality, useful, right. Something that's ultimately going to allow you to make a decision now, because you're imagining where the road's going to take you if you go this way, or where the road's going to take you if you go this way, or where the road's going to take you if you go this way.
Right.
So you can make better decisions now.
And in that respect, I'm happy to see our children using imagination because I know it's there. And it's actually a problem. People who have difficulty, like with autism, lose the ability to imagine. And it really cripples them in a variety of ways because, for instance, they'll look at the expression on someone else's face and they can't really relate to the person or talk to them because they can't imagine what the other person is thinking or feeling. And they're a blank slate because they cannot put themselves in that person's shoes. And this is what, at least that's my understanding of it.
So it makes it very difficult to have a good conversation with them.
Or for them to hear what someone else is saying to them. Or...
And parents describe it as trying to break through to the child, trying to just make that connection, look them in the eye and make that connection.
Have some understanding. And so I'm happy to see our children developing their imagination in that regard.
And they have no shortage of imagination.
But we don't spend a lot of time encouraging them to just dream and just imagine. We spend a lot of time teaching them what is real or encouraging them to use that as, now, did you really think through what you just did before you did it?
And, our children are very, I guess, practical, very realistic about things.
They are very literal.
Very literal. So when they watch a cartoon where the rules are different, the coyote runs off the cliff and he keeps running until he notices that he's off the cliff, then he falls. That doesn't make any sense to them.
They're like, well, shouldn't he have fallen when he walked off the edge of the cliff?
It's like, no, that's funny. That's funny. As if, he's running off the cliff and he keeps on running until he realizes that he's not on the cliff anymore. Then he falls, like as if he needs to acknowledge it before it becomes a reality.
And the other thing that it's increasingly becoming obvious is that I think because of the way that we've always spoken to them or because of the way that we use them imagining things or imagining decisions, they aren't that open right now to manipulation, which can make confrontation with them happen that wouldn't happen otherwise. Meaning, with a lot of kids, when they're upset about something, what usually is done is you distract them by giving them something else. Our kids are not that distractible. So you actually have to come head to head with whatever it is that they're having a problem with, and you have to face it down. You have to work with it with them. You can't just say, "Oh, here, have a cookie and it'll make it better," or, "Hey, why don't you come and draw a picture over here?" You can't. They're not good. It's difficult to coax them out of things, which is probably good for us. We'd get lazy.
Yeah. Well, I've seen moods change on occasion, but that's not really what we want to do. We don't really want to. How do you describe it?
You don't want to coax a kid who is having a really stinky attitude out of the attitude. You want them to fix it.
Yeah, you have to have the attitude gone. If the attitude is the problem, not just the symptoms of the attitude. Oh, you're smiling now. Everything's okay.
Because that's how we will teach them to be adults who can handle a little adversity. They might not feel like doing this and that, whatever, but they need to be able to summon the ability to make wise decisions, to straighten themselves up if need be, and to continue about what needs to be done without being crippled.
Yeah. So God gave us these tools. He gave us the tool of imagination. Excuse me. He gave us the tool of feelings. It's more than just a tool, but it's something that can be used as a tool.
And he did actually give us hearts, and the hearts
Yeah.
do have desires.
He gave us free will. He gave us all these things, and they're not bad things, but they're things that can be exploited. And they're things that, if are overdeveloped, can cause some big problems.
And so that's why we were talking about there's a hidden thing there in kids shows and kids movies that we hadn't really considered, and it's the over encouragement of imagination toward things that are really not true.
Hmm.
And the encouragement to live in a fantasy world, and many characters in movies get rewarded for that. Their fantasy actually comes true
Yeah, it does.
in a lot of
Or
respects.
you have the story where the fantasy is questioned and there's a crisis of faith in the fantasy, and then in the end it turns out that the fantasy was true.
The fantasy was true, and all the people who were trying to be realistic, they're the ones who have to come around and realize that the impossible was true.
But clearly it was impossible,
Right.
you know. So
Anyway, so it was just a random thought where I said to Ben, "Why are we encouraging children to be imaginative? I mean, what is there something a kid is better at than being imaginative?" Anyway, and so
our children
we've
definitely
had this
have no
very long
problem with
conversation.
imagination.
So this is just a sample of very long conversations we had this week.
That's why our podcasts are getting to be 41 minutes. This was supposed to be a short one.
Well, we kind of had to make up for the fact that we skipped last
All
week.
right, 2 for 1.
It's a two 20-minute podcasts in
And
one.
not even a single prop. How's that?
Well, maybe that was boring.
You'll have to use some imagination.
Nice tie-in.
Yep. All right, we're going to leave it at that because it's at 41 minutes and 50 seconds.
Well, my eyes are still open.
I think it's time to go to bed.
Okay.
So say goodnight, Lauren.
Good night, Lauren.